is here.
And
We
we
can
can
just,
also
it's up to you, you can pull it out if you want, and there's a clicker. It works now. Just watch out for the cord.
Okay, I'll just start off with.
You may be wondering why we went to Uganda. Because it's not necessarily at the top of everybody's list, but Winston Churchill coined it the Pearl of Africa. And and it was because it had such stunning landscapes and high biodiversity and very stunning. It's part of that East African Rift Valley system that we'll show you a little bit more about today. Yeah.
Some people can't see.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and so since then, there's been a variety, after the colonial governments, there's been a variety of governments that were sort of descending into bad and then worse, sort of hitting a pit with Idi Amin Dada in the 70s, so it wasn't really a place to be unless you wanted to be there for the rest of the time. And now it's a fairly stable government. It's referred to as a hybrid regime because it's militaristic or autocratic. The president's been the president for 40 years, and then there's an element of democracy. But there's also an element, a fairly good element of stability. So now it is as our guide said, the tourism industry is 25 years old. So anyway, so it's a pretty exceptional place, and hopefully you'll be convinced of that when we show you a few slides tonight.
Right. Kathy's got the clicker. You're on. Oh, I'm going to talk about the slide. We saw lots of cattle egrets, by the way. These are Cape Buffalo. And one thing about Cape Buffalo, they're going to be near permanent water because they have to drink every day. So if you're ever lost and need water, just follow the Cape Buffalo. It'll be dirty when you get there, but it'll be water. So anyway, this is a cattle egret. There we go. Doesn't show up on the screen. For heaven's sake. Anyway, cattle egret.
Yeah, it does.
Does it? Shows up. Doesn't show up on the screen for some reason. Isn't that strange? I haven't had that happen before. Anyway, the cattle egret likes all animals that stir up the ground and cause insects to be present. So cattle do that very effectively, so the Cape Buffalo, and we saw so many on the trip. Next one, Kathy. So, where is Uganda? Well, it's in East Africa. We flew from Canada to Brussels, stayed overnight, and then flew down to Entebbe, which is in Uganda, near Kampala, the capital. And you'll notice on the screen in Africa, the Saharan area is very dusty and desert-like, and it's drier down south too. So we're in the prime area of Africa in terms of biodiversity. And it's on the equator, by the way. The equator runs through it right where the airplane is. It's trying to cross the equator. So there we are, on the right-hand side, on the equator. Now Uganda is in the yellow. It's on the north side of Lake Victoria, a really, really large lake. Several years ago, quite a few years ago actually, Kathy and I were on the south side of Lake Victoria in Tanzania. It was only my second trip to Uganda, but this one was much more fun. I was there on an eco tour. The first time I was at a parliamentary conference, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Conference. The two don't match up at all. So Uganda, in this case, is in the yellow. South of South Sudan, next to Kenya. Rwanda and Burundi, the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. They're all in this area. Ethiopia, Somalia, and off the coast are a couple of small islands called the Seychelles and something else. Anyway, quite a part of the world. Here's our tour group. By the way, we went with Eagle Eye Tours. It's a Canadian company. In the back, on the left, is a veterinarian from southern Alberta, Lynn, who is a good friend here tonight. We had to do the PEI thing. Once she found out we were from PEI, we said, "Oh, you know somebody from PEI? Who would that be?" "Oh, Dr. Sue Dawson." "Yes, I know her." Anyway, this is Lynn, Dr. Lynn Gratz. The next two in the back are a couple from Saskatchewan, Stan and Jan. Kathy Martin, a short person in the back. I don't think it was being short. but she was in this case. Richard, with the hat and the binoculars hanging down, he was one of the original owners of the tour company. Now he sold the company and he's just having fun going on tours. Our local guide, Johnny, on the far right, and he was an excellent birder, as well as being our driver. Kneeling, I'm on the left, and our main guide, James, he grew up in Tanzania, but he's British, but a very good birder, and he's been there quite a number of times. That's our group. And here we are on the equator in our 8-person Land Rover. That's Kathy with her binoculars. I'm not sure what she's spotting, but she's obviously working on something. And as usual, I was goofing off. She took all the notes on the trip, by the way. Okay, next one. Kathy? Okay, Lake Victoria.
Wow.
I mentioned earlier that this large lake. On the left is Lake Victoria. And we took a picture of it when we went on to the Mabamba wetlands. And they're on the right. And I don't think you can see all the trails through the wetland in the slide. But it's a huge area. There's got all these waterways through it. And that's me looking at it. Next one, Kathy. Okay, here we are. We're in those wetlands and we're looking for the big bird. Not hard to find if you see it, because it's as tall as I am. Really tall. For a bird, not for a person. Anyway, it's called the shoebill for obvious reasons. Look at that big bill on it. It's on the right. So we were going through these waterways, which fishermen used. It's amazing how many people were in there for fishing and how many eco-tourists were also in there. And they don't use motors, they pole. So these guys are really working. Okay, next one, Kathy.
I'll just talk a little bit more about the shoebill.
Yes.
It's in a family of its own. It's sort of between around in the bustard family, and it's about 4 to 5 feet high, 10 to 14 pounds, so the weight of a really good cantaloupe. And it looks like it makes its living by just standing still and for long enough that anything that might be edible decides that it's just a reed and then it just very quickly attacks it. So a lungfish, different kinds of small crocodiles, frogs, whatever. So it's a very solitary beast. So you'll almost never see more than one at a time. Even when they're in pairs, they kind of tend to nest separately. There's about 10,000 in the world, but most of them are in these enormous papyrus and reed swamps where it's mostly inaccessible. So this Mabamba wetland is one of the areas in the world that's most accessible to this unusual beast.
Right, and sometimes groups are lucky enough to get more than one. We only got one, so all the boats were congregating up to this poor critter. But it was very cooperative. And Kathy mentioned about the reeds, the papayas. Remember the Egyptian paper we talked about years ago that they wrote on? I guess it's still used, but mostly by artists now. Anyway, those are the kinds of grassy or reed-type plants that are surrounding this bird, and they're very tall plants. So you can see them here even taller than that bird. Next one, Kathy.
Okay, I'm going to take over this one.
Oh, yeah.
So this is, its closest relative is in the pelican family. So here's a closer up of it. It has a hook on the beak, and it literally will stand there for hours and then stab whatever comes close to it. So it's a most unusual beast, and a destination for people who go to Uganda. They go for the shoebill. So these wetlands are really important wetlands. They're a couple of thousand, 2,400 square kilometers. And it's a Ramsar site, so it's an internationally significant wetland, and then also an important bird area. So there's a lot of water birds there, and a lot of ecotourism. In fact, that poor shoebill gets a lot of people, a couple hundred people a day looking for it. Even though it's a real labyrinth of water channels and that, so when you're going down, this looks like a fairly major one here, but we're basically pushing our way through the reeds, and most of us would never be able to get back to where we started from. It's such an immense wetland, but they like really large landscapes, and this is really a waterway too. You see here, there's they're poling along a ferry with a vehicle on top. So it's a very, like there's a lot of fishing there, and then ecotourism, and
a lot of other birds too.
and a lot of other birds, yellow-billed ducks, and hasanas, etc. So one of the places we went to, most of the conservation in Uganda is sort of cost recovery. So you don't, there's not a lot of support. There might be some foreign support, but this was a place we went to called the Bagodi Wetland Community Forest. It was 8 square kilometers, so 4 kilometers by 8 kilometers area that they sort of rehabilitated. So they had a fence around the forest, and in this forest there's 8 species of primates, monkeys, and elephants, and the community got together, landowners and farmers, and sort of commandeered this land. I don't quite know how they got it, but they managed it with tourists coming and that to recover the forest, build boardwalks through it, and they have a native plant nursery, and they sort of also have a lot of native plant nursery and that. So you can see here, this wetland has very hard edges, so what isn't in the forest with a fence, it looks like this. So we have 8 species of monkeys here. And the money that they get from people coming to visit and that supports their schools and their hospital. So it's huge to the community and something that they managed. I don't know how much it was to get in. It was included in our tour, but anyway, that's sort of a local initiative that seems to be really effective, because of course if you don't have some kind of forest, you're not going to have much water. So they were able to use water for some of the crops and for the native nursery. And now we're going to get back to the park, and Diane will talk about.
This is the second largest park. It's out in the savannah, which is grasslands primarily. You see grasslands with the acacia trees. And named for, obviously, our late Queen Elizabeth. And we found a lot of different animals here. We weren't allowed to get out of the vehicle, except if you had to pee. You could go out right behind the vehicle and hop back in after. Anyway, we found elephants roaming around here, and lots of impala. In front of the elephant is an impala, not a sheriff, but an impala. And on the right is a water buck. And so lots of native ungulates are there. We have a harem. This impala in the center, horns, had all these females with them, so obviously a harem. And some warthogs on the right. Cape buffalo I mentioned earlier. You'll always find them somewhere within a day's reach of water, because they have to drink every day, as I mentioned. And every so often we find some very pretty birds, or interesting birds. This one is what they call a double-toothed barbet. Now barbets are fairly common, but this one is very attractive. There's many species. When I say they're fairly common, there's quite a few different species of them. So next one.
They're one of the woodpeckers they're not a woodpecker, but they excavate holes in trees for nesting. So they provide a service in terms of providing holes for themselves for nesting and roosting, but also other species.
As many woodpeckers here do too, of course. To find other things in the holes after the woodpeckers have lived in them for a year or two sometimes. Okay, we're going to deal with a very specialized creature here. It's not the Cape buffalo. It's the yellow-billed oxpecker. And on the left, you'll see on the far left animal, you'll see three I think, oxpeckers. And this is a photo we got from Diane, the veterinarian. And she's got 4 oxpeckers in that lower photo on the right. And they clean up any grubs or insects that may be on the animals. And sometimes they're not above picking little holes in them too, or picking at any spots so that there's more insects attracted to them. Very enterprising.
Sort of a commensal, but also a parasite.
Good and bad. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, so these, there's, in these forests, in protected areas, you have big delicious birds too. The big delicious birds often disappear, but these are turacos, very colorful and large, and we have 5 different species of them. This, the one that's on the branch there is called a black-billed turaco, and Ross's turaco is a very, very dramatic bird when it flies. We don't have anything like this. It's a tropical bird. It's kind of in the sort of list of systematics of birds. It's between a bustard and cuckoos, so it's not really related to anything we've got. But there's 5 species of turacos in Uganda, and then a couple of other ones that are fairly closely related.
So you can see why every night we might have had to get together and make sure we had our species list up to date. Because if you missed a day, you'd really miss out on it. The Kasinga Channel, 32 kilometers long, divides the park into 2 parts, Queen Elizabeth National Park. And we went on a tour boat and went up the channel and found this floating mass of vegetation that had a crocodile on it. So, okay.
It's just a tiny little island, but it had about 10 species of egrets and kingfishers and that, but it was just floating in the channel. Papyrus Island.
Anyway, I'm not real keen on crocodiles, I didn't want to get too close to it. But along the banks of this channel, we had elephants, we had hippopotamus, and the hippos were very interesting because they're big, they're heavy, and they swim underwater and then come up and toss small boats over. So fishermen often get killed and drowned, and other things are just killed or hurt or maimed.
Yeah, so when they put the park in, they required the fishermen to use a boat that was, I think, 25 feet long or whatever, so basically it's considerably longer than they had been using. But the mortality of fishermen went down quite a lot. It's not 0, but so every few weeks rather than every day. So they see anything that's sort of big in the water as a competition, and so they could just go and turn it over and then.
And speaking of competition, if a female has a child or a baby hippo, and it's a male, she's got to get away with that male baby. Otherwise, the father will kill it. Yeah, he doesn't like any competition, no matter what age. So, away they go on their own. Other than that, if it was a female, she could stay with the herd. Bush pigs. They are bigger than the warthogs, but they're still in the pig family. On the left. On the right is an elephant rooting around in the bank, obviously for some minerals.
Now, the bush pigs are quite unusual to see actually, because they're mostly nocturnal. So we were just lucky to see it. So the warthogs are savanna pigs, and these are forest pigs.
So we were used to seeing the warthogs when we were in Tanzania. We saw them almost every day. But this is the only time I've ever seen a bush pig. Had you seen them before anywhere, Kathy?
No.
New to you too. Okay, great. Okay, just at our turnaround point on the channel, we happened to find all these skimmers and an elephant and a Cape buffalo all in the same photo. It was pretty fantastic. It was just everywhere you looked, there's always something. I mean, the biodiversity was amazing. You want to say anything about this?
Yeah, and then I'll.
Ornithologist.
Yeah, then I'll move into the, so I'll move into growth then after that.
Perfect.
So yeah, the skimmer is kind of like a relative of the tern, so they have very long wings and very good flyers, and a bit unusual to see them. I don't know what they were doing there because it was like halfway down the channel, but they were just roosting and resting, I guess. So this is our transition period to the next one, which is one of the hooks for going to Uganda, was to see the gorillas. And so the mountain gorilla, there's about 1,000, a little over 1,000 of them now. In the 1980s, they were down to 250 to 400 animals. And they're in two different populations that are quite separate. Uganda has half the world's mountain gorillas. They have 459. And then the others are in the Virunga Massif, which is the area where Diane worked, and she really brought the plight of the mountain gorilla to international attention. First by studying them and finding out just how peaceful they were, and all the sort of removed a lot of the misconceptions, and then struggled mightily against poachers. And she ultimately was murdered herself, but her legacy lives on. So the other half of the mountain gorillas are in the Dominican Republic and Rwanda and Zambia. So that's where the others are. So when you go in Uganda, there's 4 sectors where there are in this park. So the Windy Impenetrable Park is where all of these gorillas live. The Windy Impenetrable Park is only 320 square kilometers. So it's the size from, say, if you go up Eastern King, so if you go from Surrey to the North Shore and up to East Point, that's where those almost 500 gorillas live, in an area that small. There's about 10 groups in each, so there's 4 sectors or 4 like groupings of them, and then there's 10 groups in each. So here we have in the Windy Impenetrable Forest of the Shaga section, you can see there's 10 different names. Those are the names of the groups. And so we were chosen. When you go there first, you have to apply for permits way in advance. In fact, the company applies for the permits, and you get assigned a sector, and then you go and you start with an orientation sector, so a place there where they give you lots of rules that are already on all the signs, but they say them all again. And then you register, and everybody gets a group. So we got assigned the Boyza group, BWEZA, and that meant beautiful, the beautiful group. And we had Florence, who was our guide. She's holding the sign, and then every group has a policeman, and then a guard, an armed guard. And so one of the things, as I said, most of the conservation initiatives in Uganda are self-funded, whatever, they have to pay their own way, but the government does supply police to this group, because of course it's the top industry in Uganda, so it makes a lot of money, so they contribute something. But the rest of the people that are around this, so they have to make their own way in terms of funding. And then this is what it looks like. This is gorilla habitat it's sort of Afro-montane forest. It's impenetrable, that's the name of the forest. And it pretty much is from canopy right down to the bottom. And they just slash out trails that grow in again very quickly. We started off in a very sort of nice little trail. It was when I was thinking, oh, this is really good. But basically you're in volcanic uplift, very steep sides. So you're mostly going through forest like this. And and along the way we had various other things that we were looking for. What we found, like this arrowhead viper on the left, and a very fancy chameleon on the right. So this is an area with lots and lots of birds and lots of biodiversity in general. And after 2.5 hours of walking, we get to the habitat, we get to the gorilla habitat. But the gorillas are groups, they're habituated, because otherwise this would never work, because you would be not spending, they sort of guarantee, or loosely guarantee, somewhere between 2 and 6 hours to get to the group. That's the walk you're considered to have to be able to do. And you can get a porter to help you, and that's a good idea. But when you get there, this is what it looks like. And then all of a sudden the animals are already there. And it's because they have tracking groups that kind of spend a lot of time with them and tell them where the animals are. And probably what they really do is they have it organized so that you're getting there when they're having their first siesta. So, because basically when they're herbivores, that's what they eat all the time, just vegetation. And so they're eating, a lot of time eating, and then the rest of the time just resting. And so we had in this group 10 animals. We had an adult female and one pretty young baby that you can sort of see the adult female is the furthest down there, and she has a fairly small baby with her. And then we had a silverback male, which we'll show you in a second. And then a variety of young 3 to 4 year olds and sort of a little bit maybe older than that, some teenager young males. So it's mostly males. The only females were the baby and the adult female. And then these are the young ones. They were up for all kinds of mischief, like they would grab your cell phone or coming. You're really close to them, but you're not supposed to approach. But they sometimes come right up and touch you like they did to Diane. Diane, they sort of whacked the side of her leg a little bit. Not hard, just touched it.
They like to have fun, and we're all on a steep hill, so, if they can knock down a tourist, they're quite happy to do so. But I saw him come and put up my knee, and he bounced off. His little brother came along and gave me a swat. Okay.
And this is the silverback. In this group, there was only one silverback. He was 28 years old. There had been 2, and sometimes there's 2 or even 3. I don't quite know how that works, but anyway, apparently the other one died of natural causes. So this is the guy that he was in charge, and I guess most of the babies were his, because he was pretty tolerant in having them sort of crawl all over him and that sort of thing. So he was there, as Florence said, he was just having farts of satisfaction. So after this wholesome meal. And we really were quite close to them. We weren't sure what to expect, but this is us watching the silverback there. And you can see Jan there in the lower right, and she's very close. Like we weren't really sure how close they are, but the whole deal is they have to be in a mood to just lie around for a bit, because otherwise, when they decide to leave, which they can tell time. We had an hour there, that was our time, so they said you can have an hour. And literally, the silverback was lying around doing nothing, swatting flies and farting and whatever. And then, right on the dot, they know they deal. And then he just got up and broke a couple of branches, small trees, and then just walked off, and they all followed him. And like after 1 minute, you wouldn't be able to even get to them.
Couldn't see them.
You couldn't see them, and they just moved so quickly through the vegetation, and you're there, kind of.
They're gone.
Yeah. So it's pretty neat. There's 15 groups in the park that are habituated, and it takes 2 to 4 years to habituate them to a group. So you don't need to do anything. They're comfortable with you being there, but they know the rules, and the rules are after an hour we're there. So.
Oh, Mike mentioned about during the COVID.
Oh yes, during the COVID, there was nobody there, and so then that's the other thing is that they get dehabituated. So the tracker groups that were there would keep following them and sort of connecting with them, and so they're not afraid of you, but they're also not in any way aggressive, and of course the armed personnel were there in case of any issues. But there was nothing, and then when we got right to the place, all the porters and the guides, except for Flory, just stood back and stayed away 15 meters or so. The gorillas are they share a lot of DNA, 98% of the DNA, our DNA, and they're quite susceptible to respiratory illnesses, so Diane wouldn't be allowed to go on the group tonight. So we had to wear masks when we went to visit them since COVID. And of course, one of the things the gorillas do is not just the trackers and that, but we've had dancers and gorilla groups and t-shirts and that, so they add a tremendous amount to the local economy, the hotels and dancers, souvenirs and trackers and trekking guides and that sort of thing. So they really do add a tremendous amount to a community in an area that is extremely
poor and not, and furthermore, there's very hard edges on this park. So this park, you don't have to wonder where the boundary is because it's a cornfield or bananas or whatever. So it's not, if it's not in that park being protected, then it's farmed, so it's being used. And so there's a lot of pressures on it, a lot of stressors for the gorillas because the tourism pressure, if you just look at all those vehicles there, that's just one morning and you don't even see, and you can't even see all the vehicles. So there's quite a bit. They manage it pretty well in terms of, but the park is really small for that number of animals. And as I say, fields right up to the edge. Disease is always an issue, either with humans, in contact with humans, or agriculture, cattle, whatever. Poaching, the poaching for the Uganda, for the gorillas themselves is not so much an issue now, but sometimes they're killed with snares that are meant set for ungulates, so for bushmeat, etc. And as I say, the hunting isn't a major problem for that. And then Diane can start talking about other kinds of management.
Right. Well, I was surprised that in a national park there were cattle grazing. Now these were impressive cattle, very impressive horns. So I guess they could fend for themselves quite well. And on the right are Holsteins, which surprised me. On the other hand, what's a Holstein doing in this environment? Anyway.
In with the zebra.
Oh yeah, the zebra in the background. Can you see the zebra, you folks, behind the Holstein cattle?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, quite amazing what you could see. When I was there in 2019, I wasn't aware during this conference that they just passed a wildlife act to protect animals. Now, you get some pretty heavy fines for harming or killing all of these protected species that are on this list, including hippos and elephants, lions. We never did see a lion on this trip, by the way. We tried awfully hard one day, but we never got a lion here, but we saw lots of them in Uganda a few years ago. We don't know how heavily this legislation is enforced. I'd really like to find out more about that and have to check on that. But at least the act is in place. Sure. Okay. Another park we visited was the Maburo National Park, and it was our first giraffe. We got to see quite a few of them, of course, but the first one was the one that's always exciting. You always have to take a photo of it. And lots of zebras in this particular park. I think there are also a lot of Cape buffaloes and a lot of ungulates. So it was an interesting place. Here's some of the savanna animals. On the left is eland, a pair of eland, the male and the female. And I mentioned earlier, but the Cape buffalo really like water and being near water. But the water holes have lots of other animals, and also quite a variety of animals like waterfowl, shorebirds, as well as lots of mammals. Mostly Cape buffalo in that one. And we really liked the birding that we did. Of all the birds in Uganda, how many are on the list, Kathy?
805.
We saw close to half. So that's amazing, in a very short, relatively short period. This is the blue-breasted bee eater, so lots of bee eaters. They're very common in this part of Africa. They're very pretty. And, Kathy, you talked about this one.
Yeah, so another destination bird, like the birders have birds that they go to places for just to see that bird. And one of those was the shoe-billed, another one is the finfoot, the African finfoot. And again, it's a water bird, kind of looks like a duck, but it's really closer to a grebe or a rail. And it's in a family of, it's in its own family. It's been identified, like it's been classified a few times, but it's a little bit closely related to a sunbird, like the American African. This is the African finfoot, but it's like an American sunbird. Anyway, very, very sneaky little female. And we were quite lucky to see it on this area. And then lots and lots of eagles, fish eagles, with gigantic nests that they build on every year. So we were somewhat limited, Diane and I, in terms of cameras. I was just using my phone, so I focused on big birds and that. But but there were quite a few eagles along here. And, you wanna do agriculture?
Sure. And transportation. The bicycles, we did see people actually riding bicycles, as in like riding a bicycle, but we saw them more often used for transporting materials, whether it's jugs of water or bananas. This bike loaded with bananas. And the motorbikes, yes, sometimes people were riding them, like the first two riders on the right, but this fellow has a load of pineapples. This is what they're taking their produce to market with.
Yeah, we had some distribution centers that we went to, like there was a huge one for bananas. And people would be going with these bicycles laden to these centers that were in the middle of nowhere really, but that's how they get their materials to market.
Look at this milk vehicle. Those are large milk cans. In fact, they're either 60 pounds or 80 pounds. They're big enough, I think they're 80 pounders. I came in from a dairy farm, so that's important, the size of the milk cans, by the way. And on the right, coffee. And again, to help raise money for maintenance of the gorillas. Next one,
Yeah,
Kathy.
that was gorilla coffee, not very good, but smell good.
We mentioned that tourism now being the top industry. The national bird, I was going to say the provincial bird, the national bird of the country is the gray crowned crane. And whenever you see the crest of the country, there'll be an impala and a gray crowned crane on the crest of the country. Beautiful bird. And on the right is an ecotourism resort. And there were a lot of those in the area that we were in.
And we really didn't get sick most of the time. Mostly when you go to Africa, you end up with something. A couple of us got something shortly, but everything is pretty much locally produced and without pesticides because of course they can't afford them and there wouldn't be a reasonable distribution link to get pesticides to the crops anyway. So we were mostly eating local food that was all, chicken and pork, and I can't remember if we had beef or not, but, so we had all local stuff, and it was, all sort of pretty good for people that don't have intestines that are used to a lot of things, so it worked out pretty well. It was really a very, well organized, and everything, the hotels were all pretty good, and so it's pretty, very nice place to go. In fact, it's a great place to go if you want to see part of the Rift Valley before you go to Kenya and see, or Tanzania and see some of the other big animals. So it's definitely, I'd recommend it as a destination.
And yeah, the very first bird we saw out of our hotel, because we didn't get in there until midnight, so we opened the screen the next morning, was a stork, an Arbo stork. But that's not what this photo's from. This is from our very last day. It's on the edge of Lake Victoria. So
It was our first bird and our last bird. We have about 360 species of birds. And in that whole range of habitats. Part of the tour is set up to go to maximize the number of kinds of birds you can see, the different habitats. So, and that's it.
any questions?
We have a map and a bird book if anyone wants to look at some of the areas that we went through later.
Yeah, the bird book's over there somewhere. Or is it over here? Somebody had hand up. Yes, go ahead.
What kind of a noise does the shoe-bill bird make?
Didn't make any noise. Should bill. Did it make any noise?
No, it's silent, it's mostly silent. Like, it's so asocial, but it would probably sound like a grateful heron or something. When it flew away, it was like I was mentioning, it's a big looking heavy bird. When it flew like a grateful heron. Like, it was very graceful flyer.
So the size of it.
Yeah.
Actually, to add to that, I've actually seen, clips online of shoebills, and they don't make noise, but they kind of can be noise like classical beef customers. Sounds like
Like an owl, like it in the nest will clock the bill. Yeah.
not quite like that. Because
Yeah?
Do you know what the, like, an average annual rainfall for both the Savannah area and the rainforest area is?
Oh, I wouldn't, I did look that up a while ago, but I guess it would be totally dependent on the Savannah would have maybe 50 centimeters or so a year or less, and maybe not every year. And then the rainforest, we had probably 50 millimeters in the afternoon when we got back. In fact, we were lucky, we found out later that when they did all this torturous registration, they were really evaluating the mobility of the groups. And so the ones that were sort of more decrepit looking got assigned to the closest group. And they even will, if you're in a wheelchair or you're a paraplegic, they will carry you to the gorillas. For a fee, of course. But if it's on your bucket list and you want to see them, they'll make it happen for you. So it was kind of hilarious. We got back and we had lunch, and then it just pounded down rain for about an hour. And then at the end, we were back at the hotel eating, and there was a group of, it looked like in their mid-20s. And they got the 6-hour group. So when but they had a great time, they thought it was fabulous, but literally they just were arriving at the gorillas when it started to downpour. So, but for us, it was 2.5 hours out, but it was only a half hour back, just because they move around, and so they don't really know what to. Later, we realized that they were working out our capacity to move through those mountain landscapes.
Just around the hippopotami that would toss the boats and people would die. They don't eat them, they drown. Is that
People
what
would drown because they couldn't swim.
Oh.
Yeah, so the question was, the hippos tip over the boats.
Yeah.
I mean, the hippos, especially the males, are very aggressive, so they'll come racing out at you, and then probably they just think it's another hippo because their eyesight's not that great. And yeah, they tip the boat, and for the most part, yeah, the fishermen probably drown. I don't know if they'd attack them and beat them up a bit, but I don't know, but don't think they particularly eat them. But there's not much good. They don't survive the experience.
Okay.
I'm kind of interested in hearing more about your time with the apes, what that was like, what did you do during the hour that they were with you? Was there any communication? You know, I've seen an ape in a zoo, at the Bronx Zoo, and it was a very eerie feeling to have them on one side of the glass and me on the other, but you were in a much different situation.
So the question was, what was our feeling when we were within our hour with the gorillas? And well, first of all, I was really surprised that we were so close, right? Because you basically, literally, even when the porters left us behind and said, "Go ahead," and we went ahead and go over there. Flory came with us. But it was not clear that they were saying me to you. I wasn't expecting them to be quite that close until the vegetation kind of moved and said, "Oh, there they are." And then they were pretty relaxed, I would say. They weren't really interested because they get this every day. And they're very smart, so they just know the routine. And it's not unusual for gorillas. I mean, I study birds, and they just figure out what you're doing, and they just, they're kind of keeping an eye on you and whatever. So I don't think that they were particularly stressed by us, but I wouldn't say they were enamored with us or anything. The young ones, I'd say they tolerated us, yeah.
Young ones like to have a bit of fun, as I mentioned, that they could knock us down the mountain.
Right.
That'd be great fun, wouldn't
Or
it?
the little guy was, pounded, one of the smallest ones, he was probably only a year old, he was pounding his, chest, practicing. But, and then they were just fiddling around, two of the young ones were just, I have some clips that I didn't put in because I didn't want to go through the possibility that it wouldn't work, but they're just frigging around in the trees, kind of fun, because, they've eaten, and the adults are kind of resting, but they're just sort of playing around, sort of socializing, but I wouldn't say they were socializing with us. we were just there and slightly more, you know, keeping an eye on you more than the tree that might be considering climbing. I don't know what Diane felt.
Well, no, I was quite impressed to get so close to them in the wild, because I had seen one before, as you had behind glass. It was not the same experience at all. But to actually see them in the wild, and the big one, was this the one that came crashing toward you
Yeah.
at one point?
Yeah, I had, like, he didn't look that big when he was a little further away. And then it started, you know, sort of from me to Jake or a little bit further away, and it started racing right for me. And I thought, oh, okay, do I get behind this tree? And then just about a meter away, like from where Jean made, it just went and just flopped down. So it was just, and stayed down, it was just moving. But, you know, it sort of reminded me of some of those movies, of Godzilla movies, right? And then I was just reading about how, you know, they weigh, the silverback weighs between 300 and 400 pounds, you know, 400 pounds, some of them even 500. And they're 10 times as strong as we are. They got a lot of muscle. 50% of their body mass is muscle. So they're pretty strong. But they are not generally aggressive. If you challenge them in any way, they didn't ask us not to look directly at them, did they? I don't think they did. Because sometimes in animals, if you look right at them, they see that as a challenge or that's an aggression. But they didn't really ask us to do that, and that's because these animals are habituated. And the interesting thing about it, there was also the chance to go and look at chimpanzees that we didn't do because we've seen them before. But the chimpanzees are much harder to habituate. So the groups take the gorillas 2 to 4 years of, you know, regular contact to habituate. The chimps are something like 8 to 10 years, and some of them will just never habituate. And then they can be aggressive or whatever. So they're just not, they're very different beasts. But we went furling that day, and it wasn't a very, I guess because they were hiding and they didn't really want to be interacting. So it wasn't a particularly cooperative group of chimpanzees, that's what the group said. So.
It quite amazed me that we had to wear masks. I wasn't expecting that.
But it's because they're so like us.
Yeah, yeah, and they're very particularly susceptible to respiratory diseases. Anne, you had a question?
I was just interested in the composition of the group. There was all these males with just like the one female.
Yeah.
And so were other groups made up more of females?
I don't know, and I don't know, they weren't all necessarily 10, like they're just family groups that, and as Florrie said that there was, I think 2, well for sure there were 2 silverbacks before, I was surprised at that, and I sort of think she said 3, like so I don't know that story where the one, well somebody would have to be dominant, but I don't know how that works, and it could be that this guy wasn't necessarily the silverback for necessarily that long, so he wouldn't be, well, there was a baby, and then there was a couple that were like sort of maybe 1 or 2 years old. But yeah, they were mostly males, and that, I don't think that would be normal, I would say it's just the way it works out.
So do you think that just occurred, like he just had male?
Yeah, or it could be that if one of the females died, or yeah, I think we didn't get to talk about that, or at least I don't remember. I was just surprised that they were mostly males, except for the baby and adult female. There's a question back here.
Was there much verbal communication between the animals?
No.
There was silence?
I would say it'd be mostly behavioral, so they when the silverback, when he decided that time was up, he got up and he ripped off a couple of big branches and broke them, you know, kind of over there kind of thing. It wasn't really, and then I guess that was his intention movement, and then he started moving and they just all followed.
Well, how did the teenage gorillas communicate?
Oh, they were just playing, wrestling.
No verbal?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it was engrossing, right? It's, but I don't think, and we weren't saying much.
No.
Like we were all pretty quiet, I
We
think.
didn't want to spook anybody.
Yeah. No, I think it was all visual. at that point, pretty much. Yeah, they played around, but they, you know, they were just doing their own thing, like if somebody in a sandbox kind of thing.
Yeah, it was pretty cute, a couple of little ones hopped up onto the father's back and they were straddling and playing over the, and he tolerated it. I was waiting for him to swat them off and he did not. Quite neat.
Jake?
If somebody was to budget for planning a trip like this, ballpark, how much would you want to set aside to plan one of these trips? I'm not trying to get specifics, but
Same
like,
amount you told me the year earlier, Kathy.
20K, I guess, that would be, like everything.
to be comfortable with it.
There's not, there wouldn't be much left of it.
Yeah.
Fly there and back.
Yeah.
And we stayed an extra couple of days because in January, you can't necessarily leave this island when you plan. So that's why we went, we left 2 days early and then spent one night in Brussels and then got there a day early just in case we were delayed. So, but once you're on the trip, like we got money, which we never spent because there was nothing to spend it on, right? So, because the company really covered all the meals and stuff, and there really wasn't much to buy, and there certainly wasn't places to get money either, except in Entebbe. So yeah, it was something to do, really, something to do every day, and the days, some of them were pretty long. We didn't show you the accommodations or anything, but they really varied. We did have one fabulous night in a tent camp. That was great. That was the night we saw the leopard. We, on our way back to the tent.
So waiting, there was no photos.
Yeah, no photos, but it was pretty exciting to see it in the headlights. Yeah, it was quite neat. There was some hands up over here that I was ignoring for a bit.
Did you see the leopard after the bike jump?
No, those were 2 different days.
So you'd be concerned about snakes as well?
Well, yeah, I think they really look after you, right? So we didn't spot it, somebody else. It's probably one of the porters. I mean, the porters and the guides, they're just so good at seeing everything. I mean, they just, even if they don't have, even the young ones, like we had porters, we had, what do you call them? Porters, yeah, the high school students that would carry your pack because it's pretty hot, like mostly help you over the slippery spots, and they were all
Tie your shoelace. And again, they had signed the porters pretty well to the height of the people.
I'd like to thank you on behalf of Nature PEI for coming out tonight and our members. And if anybody doesn't have membership, I would really appreciate it if you would take one out. And yeah, thank you very much for coming out. And I'm sure they can answer any questions you have after.